Please note that listeners may find some of this content in this episode upsetting or distressing. If you would like to access support relating to the topic discussed, please get in touch with our team. All of our contact details can be found at www.healthwatchessex.org.uk.
Welcome to Hidden Voices, the podcast series which explores the less heard voices in health and social care. I'm Mel and I work for Health Watch Essex. It's our job to make sure that people's experiences help to improve health and social care services. In this episode, we're talking to Teresa, who's sharing her family's experience of sepsis and also to raise awareness of this disease. Hi Teresa, thanks for coming in and having a chat with me today. I really appreciate it. So some people will have an awareness of sepsis, of the word, but can you please tell our listeners what it is, what do we need to know, and then how your son then ended up with the diagnosis, please?
Of course. First of all, I am a volunteer for the UK Sepsis Trust, so that's why I come and do talks. Sepsis is a life-threatening condition that arises when the body's response to an infection injures its own tissues and organs, with the immune system going into overdrive. So it's their autoimmune, the inflammation, everything fires up and goes crazy. If it's not treated early enough, it can lead to multi-organ failure and septic shock, and obviously death if it's not caught in time. It always starts with an infection. The most common infections are UTIs or chest infections, but that doesn't rule out any infection. It could come from anything. So you could prick your finger in while you're gardening, get an infection, and it could come from that. So it really can come from anything. And primarily, it affects younger children and older adults or people who've got an underlying health condition, but it doesn't necessarily. It can affect anyone. It doesn't discriminate, sepsis. It can get anybody.
And that's really tricky, isn't it? When the symptoms are that insidious, it's not like a heart attack or a stroke, is it? Where you may have those. It's very clear that you've got maybe some chest pains or stroke symptoms. Septic symptoms can be very widespread, can't they?
They can. I mean, there is some symptoms to look out for, and we go by sepsis. So there could be slurred speech or confusion, extreme shivering or muscle pain, passing no urine in a day, severe breathlessness. It feels like you're going to die, which is a very common one that we do hear of, and the skin is mottled or discoloured. In children, though, it can be different. So sepsis in children, they can breathe very fast. They may have a fit or a convulsion, may look mottled, bluish or pale. They may have a rash that doesn't go away when it's pressed. They may be very lethargic or difficult to wake, and they may feel abnormally cold to touch. But under 5s may be slightly different. Again, they may not feed, they may be vomiting repeatedly, and again they may not pass urine in 12 hours. So they're all the signs and symptoms, the most common ones to look out for. But I would say if you've got someone who's unwell and is deteriorating, you may have gone to the GP and got antibiotics, but they're still not getting better, they're still getting worse, I would go back. I'd always get them seen, because it can happen very rapidly. So they get worse, and then boom, it will really affect that person. And it does need to be caught very quickly. If you go into hospital and it is caught in time, the success rate is very high, because it is intravenous antibiotics and IV fluids that is the most common treatment for sepsis. But again, we don't like to overuse antibiotics, so there's new NICE guidelines, which I won't go into, but that has a system where it will show whether they're more at risk of sepsis or not, to whether they have antibiotics straight away, or it can be delayed a little bit till more test results come back.
So it's that sense of, if it's a family member or a carer for someone, to trust your gut. If there's that sense that something seems
absolutely
not normal to them, you might have seen your loved one really unwell before, but this feels different. So it's having that courage to stand up to a healthcare professional and say, this isn't normal.
This isn't normal. Could this be sepsis?
Yeah.
Always ask. could it be sepsis? That's your key phrase. And don't be afraid to ask it. And I think it is about trusting your gut. And I think that you hear that a lot, but it's something inside you when you've got your own children and you think, no, they're really not right. No, they really need to be seen. And really, sometimes you have to be really quite push it to for someone to really take notice of what you're saying, which is a shame because you shouldn't have to, but that is the case. Yeah, definitely. And you know, the statistics, there are 5 deaths an hour in the UK from sepsis, and 48,000 people each year die from sepsis, and there's 245,000 a year that are affected by sepsis. And globally, that's 11 million deaths there are a year just for sepsis. It's huge. Yeah, it's enormous. And our aim is to try and reduce those deaths through education, you know, spreading the information, spreading the word so that we can reduce those deaths and people are confident to ask, could it be sepsis?
It's so important, isn't it? And as the sooner this disease is treated, the greater the chance of survival. So it's...
Absolutely. Yeah. And the UK Sepsis Trust are amazing. You can go on their website and you will see lots of information on there. And I can go in later on to how they've helped me.
That's really helpful, just to be able to inform and educate us on what we're looking out for the signs of sepsis in both adults and children. Would you be able to share a little bit of Ben's story of his journey?
Absolutely.
His run up to his diagnosis.
Yeah, Ben started unbeknown to us. He had a problem with his arm. We thought he had a trapped nerve, but it turned out he had a spinal cord tumour. It was completely out the blue. Ben was 20, so he had to have a major operation, which lasted a very long time. Ben was a tall lad and he was built like a rugby player, so he wasn't small. And after the operation, we thought everything was fine. He came round okay, but within a matter of hours, he'd started deteriorating and he went into septic shock. But at that time, the staff, they didn't really know how to tell us what was the matter with him. I think they didn't want to alarm us too much, but ultimately we were told Ben had the possibility of dying. And over 2 weeks, we were told that at least 2 or 3 times, that they didn't think he was going to survive. But we never really had a true picture of what it was. And Ben's dad passed a poster about sepsis and he said, I wonder if that's what Ben's got. But it was septic shock, so it's obviously far worse than sepsis. Yeah. But after about 5 weeks, and believe me, Ben went through it in those 5 weeks, he was in an induced coma. He had a pneumothorax while he was in that induced coma. He had a blood clot. He had infections. He had everything, bless him. But he did come, after having a tracheotomy, he did come round from the coma. But he wasn't well. He really wasn't well. And, you know, when he was in the coma, he was in multi-organ failure. He was on a dialysis. He was on everything. So for him to come round from all of that, you know, he was called the miracle patient, really, and on the ward, in the hospital, everyone knew about Ben. And Ben was left, unfortunately, he was left temporarily paralysed. So he had to learn how to kind of see, because he had double vision. He had to learn how to swallow again. He had to learn how to move his limbs, everything, which he was doing. He did do that. But he really struggled. He struggled with his mental health on the ward, because he was on the ward for such a long time. He kept getting infections, and you know, one time he wasn't right, and he was absolutely crying and screaming, and he said, I think I'm gonna die, and he didn't know what to do with himself. And in the end, I had to get into bed with him to calm him down and cuddle him. And I remember we went to the people in charge. We said, we think he's got an infection, and they went, do you think? We're like, well, yeah, we do think, because he's acting like he was when he was little, you know. We know our child. And it turned out Ben did have an infection, but it was every kind of week and a half or 2 weeks he'd go downhill. And then he was really poorly and he had to be rushed to surgery because they thought he had a burst appendix. And he came out and he had sepsis after that. We got through that and we thought Ben was recovering really, really well. And there was a few things that I wasn't happy about and I wasn't sure about. And there was a few things that happened on the ward that I wasn't happy with. But we had a phone call in the middle of the night saying, you need to come in, Ben's really poorly. So we rushed in, and after I kind of gave them a bit of a rundown on kind of what drugs they did need to give him rather than what they were giving him, he had to go back into emergency surgery. They found his appendix intact. He had to have part of his bowel taken away. He had abscesses all along his bowel, in his stomach cavity. And so he went into he was in deep sepsis then. And after a couple of days, they tried to bring him round, but it was absolutely horrific hearing your son calling out Mum. And there's nothing you can do. And I begged them to sedate him, but we knew doing that his prognosis was always going to be very poor. And Ben died the next day in my arms with his dad and his stepdad next to him. He knew he was loved. We all loved him so much. It was horrific. It was absolutely horrific.
It's a horrendous journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're obviously terribly sorry for your loss. An incredible young man, he sure was, Ben.
He was. Everyone knew him on the ward, and when we did get him out of the ward, they'd take him for a walk in a special chair and everything. But everyone knew him. Everyone stopped to talk to him because anyone that come on the ward, he'd talk to. He was really well liked and really loved. And he was, everywhere he went, he spread his joy, and that was so lovely.
But thank you so much for sharing that story, as hard and as painful as it is. But it's
his legacy.
It's absolutely his legacy, and by spreading that awareness, hopefully it's going to help others to have that, as you so rightly said, have that moment of just having that courage to say, could this be?
Yeah, could this be sepsis? It is. We wished that we were kind of had the arsenal of tools behind us. We were very fortunate in the fact that we had friends who were in healthcare that actually did help us, but we didn't have the information. And I think sometimes keeping the information away from relatives isn't always the best thing, because if you know, you can find that information to help you sometimes. Or, my mission really is that all hospitals should be able to direct people to the UK Sepsis Trust so they can get that support, or they should have a sepsis nurse that can support that person.
So with the greatest respect to the NHS, if there was one thing to improve the NHS, what might that be, would you say, in terms of?
I would say listening. Listening is one of the key things, and it's actually listening with an open mind and absorbing what that person is saying, because the person that's closest to that patient knows them the best. And I think it's really difficult if you're only listening but taking out the key things that you want to hear, rather than actually listening with an open mind and then making a judgment on what you're listening to and the concerns and what is actually concerning those people about that patient, because it is there.
As a family member isn't perhaps being paranoid or exaggerating.
No,
it's just that they know that this is something that's really not normal behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's unwell.
Absolutely.
Because they know that person best.
Yeah, definitely.
So what would you wish that more people knew about sepsis based on Ben's experience?
For me, it's knowing the signs and symptoms, being brave enough to ask, could it be sepsis? Even if you don't know all the signs and symptoms, if you're just concerned, you've got that gut worry, just to be able to ask, could it be sepsis?
Because that alone could be enough.
Because that alone could, exactly,
couldn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And also the people to be aware of the UK Sepsis Trust and the work that they do. They were amazing to me when I lost Ben. My friend found them and I rang them, and I spent an hour on the phone, probably in tears, to Oliver, one of the nurses, who are all trained to counselling. And they give so much support to people who are bereaved from sepsis, but also survivors for what they're going through, because there's a lot that you can suffer afterwards, the after effects of sepsis. So that's a really important fact to be aware of as well. Just because you have sepsis doesn't mean to say you're not going to suffer afterwards, because you may not, but you may. And if you do, to know that there's someone at the end of the line that can help you, guide you in the right direction of where to get more services, or just to listen, is really important. And they also do so much education for healthcare professionals, for lay people like myself, you know, so that awareness can be spread and more knowledge. Knowledge is power, and just for that to be spread throughout the NHS and the hospitals, so that more people are caught in the net, so they don't suffer the worst things of sepsis.
What an incredible lifeline they are.
They are incredible, absolutely incredible. And I've got to give a big shout out to my nurse Katie, who supports me, and she supported me through thick and thin in the last about 3 or 4 years, and I couldn't have done it without her. She's been amazing.
Well, I'm glad you've had the opportunity to have a shout out, and thank you to Katie.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Teresa, could you tell us a little bit more about Ben, about his character and how he coped on a personal level?
Yeah, I mean, Ben, when he was little, was really cheeky chappy. He got into everything. I mean, he honestly, I was like at the end of my tether sometimes, because it was like, oh, what is he doing now? But everything was with a smile, and he was one of those little boys that everyone loved, because he would smile and he would chat to anyone. And I'd see people in the village and they'd go, oh, hi Ben, and I think, who are you? But he'd been out with my mum and been talking to them. So yeah, from a little boy he was very sociable, really happy, unless he went shopping, and then he really wasn't happy. Yeah, and he grew up the same way, and he had some really close friends that stood by him through thick and thin. He went to college and he made some really good friends there as well. They all still keep in touch with me, which is really nice, which shows the character of Ben and them, I think. And Ben he would help anyone. Yeah, he was always had a smile on his face. He was always happy to help. I have long-term health condition, and he used to help me and look after me, and we were very, very close. He was very loving. He would, even if he was going out, it'd be like, oh Mum, is it all right if I go? And I go, yes Ben, you're like 19, you can do what you want. And but he was just considerate.
Really considerate, yeah.
And he'd run around after his sister. After he died, I found so many messages on his phone saying, Ben, can you do this? Ben, can you do that? So yeah, it was, yeah. And I think credit to him, you know, when he come round from his coma and he could speak, the first thing he said to me was, I love you, Mum, and are you looking after yourself? And I think, yeah, that. And after he died, I had so many people coming up to me saying such lovely things about his character and how he'd helped them, or he might have played with their grandchildren, or a real testament to him.
Yeah, what a thoughtful soul he was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, like his mum.
Oh, I won't go
So,
that far, but
a real kind of, team player, not only with the family,
yeah,
but also
definitely loved his family and friends.
yeah, and he was part of the air cadets, wasn't he? So you could
He
imagine
was
much
a
he
real
loved that.
active member of the air cadets. He loved his air cadets.
Mm.
They actually ended up getting a minibus, which they called Ben's bus, because they wanted Ben to be with them wherever they went.
Lovely.
Because he absolutely loved his air cadets, and he was with Malden Air Cadets for many years. Yeah.
Thank you. It's lovely to hear more about your wonderful lad. Thanks, Teresa. Teresa, I'm curious. You mentioned about septic shock. Would you just be able to highlight what the difference is between septic shock and sepsis? Please?
Yeah, well, if your body is in that dire straits of sepsis and you kind of go into septic, and your body will go into septic shock, which then is where everything is fighting against each other, which then all the organs start to shut down. It affects all your organs. Yeah. So that's kind of the process it goes, your sepsis, and then
Sure, I see.
severe sepsis will lead to septic shock.
Yes, I see. Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for what you shared with us during part 1 of our podcast.
It's fine. Thank you.
In the second part of our podcast, we're going to play a game. Full disclosure, there's a deck of cards in front of you and each one has a thought-provoking question written on it. So when you're ready, I'll pick a card at random and you have to answer the question that follows. Name one way the NHS has helped you.
Oh gosh, they've helped so many. I mean, the NHS is a massive institution, isn't it, really? And it in so many ways it has helped, in the fact that I've had my GP services, I'd say. I've had an amazing GP who saw me through my worst times. And I really, it's a Tiptree Medical Centre, and honestly, amazing. Even when I came home from the hospital after losing Ben, my friend rang them up and explained, and they were on it straight away. It was really good. I can't thank them enough.
That's fantastic.
They've been really supportive.
All credit to your local.
Yeah, they've been really good.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, next question. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a teacher, actually.
Any particular bit?
I think I probably wanted to be a lot of things, like a nurse and things, and I realised I didn't like blood. But yeah, I always liked working with little ones. I wanted to do primary school teaching, but I never got around to doing it.
But a public servant.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the best thing you have ever eaten?
Oh, I need to think about that one.
There's a lot of good food out there.
Yeah. Most recently, I went to a wedding and the caterer did desserts just for me because I'm gluten and dairy free, and they were amazing. Yeah. So yeah.
What was the dessert? Was it chocolate based?
There was a cheesecake. There was a chocolate cake. I can't remember the other one, but they were really nice. I'm a sweet tooth person, unfortunately. Yeah.
Ditto. Sounds delicious. All right, what have we got next? What's the one thing you've always wanted to do?
I have always wanted to be winched up into a helicopter.
Right, I'm thinking celebrity SAS. Yep.
Yeah, I just always wanted to be winched up into a helicopter. Yeah, for years I've always wanted to do that. I hope I never have to be through serious things, but yeah.
I hope you have a choice.
Yeah. I doubt that'll ever happen, but yeah, I don't know why I've always wanted to do that.
Have you ever been in a helicopter?
No.
No. I love that randomness about it. It's brilliant, isn't it? That sense of flying and freedom around you.
Yeah. One day I'll do a skydive, but we'll be apprehensive about that one yet. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love that. What would you do if you had £10,000 for a good cause?
If it had to go to one cause, I would, obviously I support this UK Sepsis Trust, but if I could split it, I'd probably work, I really am an advocate for the homelessness and things like that, so I'd want to help. I want to help people that really need it. Yeah, that's where the money would go.
That would be a great place to put some of that money, wouldn't it? And one last question, what would be the title of Ben's life story?
Ben's would be Our Warrior, because when he was in hospital, we had to keep a diary while he was in a coma. And when he came round, I read him the diary, and he actually said, "Oh, I think I was a bit of a warrior, wasn't I?" And we were like, "Yeah, you definitely are our warrior." And that's on his headstone. So I would have Our Warrior. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fitting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing your lived experience with us, for informing and educating us. This is such important work, isn't it? And thank you everyone for listening also. Perhaps people can pass on this information that you've shared today to someone that you know, or help spread this awareness of sepsis. As we said earlier, as soon as that disease is treated, the greater the chance of survival. So thank you, Teresa. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.